Ready on this end.
All right, and going.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Parker Radio Association October Elmering Night. We're really glad you're here tonight. Did I get that right, Dan? Are we still in October?
Hard to believe we're still in October. It feels like it's been the longest month of the year so far.
It seems like it's been the longest year of the whatever. As well. Well, it's really exciting to be here tonight. We have a lot of people that are on the YouTube side, Dan, and we have a lot of people here on the Google Meet side, and welcome to everybody. But we're here tonight. We've got a short presentation for well, I think, Dan, you might say it's kind of geared towards newer hams. Is that what we're thinking? The title of our presentation tonight is "Now That You Have Your License, What's Next?"
Absolutely, Paul. So I remember back when I got my license, and this is hard to believe. So I got my license back in 1992, which to me, 1992 it's not that far back. Yeah, that's a long time back now that I think about it. And I can remember when I got my license, number one, there was a great deal of excitement that I passed. I put a lot of effort into, and again, that was novice, technician, and a code test. But there was that great deal of excitement and accomplishment. And I think the cool thing is that, unlike today, you had to wait a number of weeks before you got that letter from the FCC and that envelope from the FCC till you knew your call sign. There wasn't a database or electronic filing. It was all done the old-fashioned way. In 1992, the good part is that they weren't using horse and buggy anymore. But not to digress on that. The license, that envelope shows up, you get your license, and then it turned into, well, now what do I do? How do I get on the air? I'm thankful I had some great Elmers that really helped me with that. And that's one of the things that we do here at the Parker Radio Association. We want to make sure we're giving you every tool and resource that we have from a collective group of nearly 200 members. So if you're a new ham, or maybe you're a experienced ham, but haven't been in the hobby for a while, this is a really great way to kind of get your feet wet again and get you back on the air. So there's a lot of things that we're going to talk about tonight. So as Paul mentioned, you got your license, now what? We're going to be talking about, HTs, operating mobile, what your next purchases are. And we're also going to talk about also being on the air. We think there's some things that are vitally important for people to understand. Once I get on the air, what's the proper way to break into a conversation and add my 2 cents? And again, we'll go over all those particulars tonight. So again, we're really glad you're here. For some of the experienced hams that are in the group, boy, please jump in. We need your input as well. And as Paul mentioned, we'll probably be talking through this for probably about the next 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up for a question and answer.
Well, and Dan, I'm a little older than you. I mean, not much, but just a little bit. But I remember getting my license in 1981, and living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and driving down to the FCC office in Dallas, and so that was a lot of fun. And then, like you said, waiting. I think it's closer to 3 or 4 weeks then. And that envelope came in the mail, and got the call sign, and it was really, really exciting. So I was talking to one of our newest hams, Dan. His name is Nicholas, and he tested. I think you talked to him as well. He tested this last Saturday and got his license on Monday.
All right.
So anyway, and so we'll talk about him a little bit in the presentation. A couple of things I wanted to mention about what Nicholas is doing a little differently than most of our new hams, and all really good stuff. So let's get started. But I would want to at least make a quick comment about our anniversary, Dan. You and I have an anniversary this in October. Do you remember?
We do.
That? We do. October 2013.
Mm-hmm.
I placed an ad on Craigslist to sell a Yaesu DMR radio, and a guy with the call N2SRK responded to the ad, and we met up, I think, in a parking lot somewhere. Wasn't that where it was?
We actually met up in, I think we were way down Parker Road.
Yeah, right.
Almost halfway to HRO.
Yeah, and we were talking about ham radio clubs and how they were non-existent, right, down in the south part of Denver. And I think Dan said, well, why don't we start one? And I said, let's do it, man. And then we had our first meeting a couple months after that. So anyway, that's our anniversary. Not to get too kinky there, but anyway. So congratulations, Dan, on coming up on the 7th year of the club, and great idea you had.
Boy,
I think that's called a broversity.
that's a
something like
bromance.
that.
Yeah, broversity. Yeah. So yeah, it's amazing how a parking lot transaction on an HT started the Parker Radio Association. That's the cool part.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump into the topic tonight. Now that you have your license, what are you gonna do next? What's next? Well, I think a lot of times the first thing people want to do, Dan, is they want to go out and buy a radio. Now, I mentioned Nicholas because Nicholas did it a little differently. He went out and bought a FTM 400 and a QRP HF rig before he got his license.
Wow.
So I think that's pretty cool. But most people don't do it that way. They get their license and they go out and they purchase a radio. So I think there's a couple questions that you got to ask yourself. And I'm sure Nicholas did ask himself, but a couple questions you have to ask yourself before you go out and get that first radio. And the first question is, how are you going to operate? Are you going to operate portable? Are you going to operate out of your vehicle? Or are you going to operate from your house? Or maybe all three, right?
Yeah, Paul brings up a great point. And I can remember when I got first licensed, much like Nicholas, I actually had and went out and bought an HT just to listen in. And I think that's one of the neat things. So even if you don't have your license yet, but you feel confident enough that, you know what, this ham radio thing is for me, we encourage you to go out and buy an HT. And, because I think it does a couple things. Number one, you get used to the technology that's out there. That's important. But number two, boy, you get to listen in. And you get to listen into not only the conversations, but the nets. And I think part of the big thing about ham radio that a lot of people forget about is listening is probably 3/4 of what you have to do in ham radio. People think it's all about communication and talking. That's only a small percentage of it. Listening and copying and following the patterns of what's going on is a great way to really get yourself acclimated into ham radio. So if you're a prospective ham, don't be afraid to go out and buy that first HT. That's what I did. I went out and bought an HT, and that really helped me out when I was pursuing my license, because growing up in the Philadelphia area, I joined a very large ham radio organization in Philadelphia. They, at one time, I think they had 300 or 400 members. I mean, it was a very, very large group. And they had one 2-meter repeater, and a couple people who were part of the club had a 440 repeater and even a 220 repeater. But the 2-meter repeater that the club owned, that was, an old term, that was the party line. That was where everybody hung out. So it was important to understand how people talked and what the flow was and what the cadence was of the conversation. So again, going out and buying that HT, I think is a great move. And I think that really helps you really get your feet wet into the whole thing. But you may be wondering, wow, I see HT prices from $500, like a Kenwood D74. I see HT prices as low as $24 for a Baofeng. I see everything in between. So you have like $24 to $500. What do I get? And I think that is one of the things that a lot of new and prospective hams may get a little high-centered on. I mean, one of the things that we absolutely recommend, you'll hear the term the big three, and the big three within amateur radio are ICOM, Kenwood, and Yaesu. I can talk purely from experience. I've actually owned some of the inexpensive Chinese radios, like a Baofeng or a Wushan. They are what I would call an absolutely a good introductory radio to the point where it's disposable. If it's one that you accidentally drop and break, yeah, you're only out about $25, and that's okay. You drop a Kenwood D74 into the parking lot without a casing, yeah, it's going to cause a little bit more damage. But there are some really, really great radios that all three of the major manufacturers have, and they have different introductory points as well. You can get an HT that's in the $125 to $150 range, and it's a dual band digital, like the Yaesu FT70, I think is a great introductory HT. You can find those at your local HRO. You can find them online. You can find them through eBay, and every retailer has them. Great introductory radio because you get two bands. You get some wide receive as well, so you'll be able to listen to some AM aircraft. Maybe listen to the Denver control towers if you happen to be out at the airport, or even close by to the airport is pretty good. So the FT70, I think, is one of the great ones. Paul, you may want to kind of elaborate a little bit on the, maybe the Baofeng and the Wushans and what the pros and cons of those are.
Well, I can, Dan, because I've owned some of those, and I can tell you that the quality is probably getting better, certainly getting better, and if you find something that you like for $29, by all means grab it and use it. But I think most hams that after you've been in the hobby for 6 months to a year, you do gravitate more to the big three, as we call them, or maybe a higher end Chinese radio, and use the Baofeng that you bought as your backup, maybe your go bag radio, maybe you throw it in the back of the truck radio, that type of thing. One of the key elements that you have to be thinking about as you buy your first handy talkie, however, is what modes do you want to operate on? Right. I think a big issue with a lot of new hams is they buy a radio that does analog only. And that's certainly fine. But if you are associated with the club like the Parker Radio Association, and we're going to probably drive that home a little bit tonight, you can ask people what they're using, what different types of modes they're using, whether it's VHF, UHF, whether it's analog, whether it's digital. And when you find a club like the PRA that has all different types of D-Star repeaters. We have a D-Star repeater, a DMR repeater, several of those. We have UHF analog, VHF analog. We have a wide range of repeaters that are on the air. Then it becomes a little more difficult to decide what that first handy talkie is going to be. Do I want to operate on analog mostly for the Tuesday night nets, or do I want to operate on the digital net Monday? And then in that case, can I get into one of the digital repeaters from my house, or what something we'll talk about a little bit later, do I need to get a hotspot? So that'll come up here a little later on in the process. But I would not hesitate to suggest any of the lower priced Chinese radios, Dan. But I think long term, those are probably not going to be what you end up with as your primary radio, simply because the companies like Yaesu have been making amateur radios for 50 years. Think about that. Since the 1950s, they've been making amateur radios, and Kenwood and ICOM both have been in the business a long time as well. So there's a logic to the way the radios are programmed. They have some of the first repeaters that went on the air back in the 60s. They were part of that whole wave of repeaters that hit the airwaves in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So the big three know what amateurs want. They know how to set up the radios to be programmed easily from the front panel. And that's really, really important. And you don't find those types of options sometimes on the Chinese radios. Mm-hmm. You can always get programming software for any of these radios, and we all use programming software. It's absolutely essential. But if you're out at an event and we're supposed to be on a certain frequency to communicate, maybe it's a public service event that we're working, and all of a sudden that frequency is not usable. We can't use the frequency that we planned on using. And then we tell everybody, go to 144, 146.55 simplex. Well, with any radio that's made by Yaesu, ICOM, or Kenwood, you can go to the front panel and you can program in that frequency. There is a chance on some of the Chinese radios, either you can't do it or it's very complicated or confusing. It doesn't follow the normal process that the other manufacturers use. So I would say, Dan, we've all owned Chinese radios, and I don't currently own any after I bought that one at Dayton a couple of years ago, and it only worked one time. And I threw it in the dumpster. It actually didn't make it to the dumpster. It hit the rim of the dumpster, and it shattered into about 1 million pieces. But anyway, I don't do Chinese radios anymore, but I think there's a place for them, and I think they're very, very good radios. And that's probably what most people buy when they get their license is a handy-talkie, wouldn't you say?
I would, yeah. That's typically the first step, because that really gives you a mess of options. And what I mean by a mess of options is that you're able to listen to multiple bands, and as Paul had mentioned, picking up an HT that maybe does analog and digital. And by doing that, that really opens up the opportunity to listen in not only on different modes, but also different bands as well. One of the things I want to call out, Scott, K0WAV in the chat room makes a great point. A lot of this also depends on what motivated you to get your license. Maybe you're interested in emergency communications like ARIES. That may be an option. Maybe you're into prepping. Maybe you're into camping. Maybe you're into off-roading. Maybe you're into hiking. All of that are factors to consider when you select your first HT. What am I going to be using it for? If I'm using it for camping and outside, and boy, I'm going to be out in the elements, you want to make sure that you pick up an HT that maybe has some mil-spec qualities to it, maybe has a level of not necessarily waterproofing, but water resistance that can come into play. And also you want something that's going to be durable if you're doing that hiking and camping. I think that's pretty good. At the same time too, if you're using it, if you're a road warrior, and sometimes throughout the year I'm a road warrior, I have no problem taking my Kenwood D74 with me, because I know it's going to be in a controlled environment. It's going to be in my luggage. It's going to be in the hotel room. I probably would not take a $500 radio out for a hike. I just wouldn't. I would take something like a Yaesu with me. And again, that's purely just from the overall build quality and things like that. So one of the things to keep in mind is what got me into ham radio, and what do I plan on using it for? And if it's for any of those emergency communications, hiking, off-roading, keep those things in mind when you're selecting your first radio. I think that's pretty cool.
And then the next thing, Dan, when we talk about HTs and we talk about new hams, almost always after they get that HT, they run it in their mobile. And that's fantastic. But there's a couple pointers that we want to make and give you a little bit of advice with regard to that. When you take your handy-talkie inside of your vehicle, you are basically inside of a steel aluminum cage. And
almost a Faraday cage. Almost
a Faraday cage. Thank you, Wayne. And so a lot of hams will take that radio with the standard antenna that comes with the radio, or they'll put a higher gain ducky on there as well, and they get in their cars and they're driving around, and there's some frustration because in some areas they can get into the W0 CFI repeater, but in other areas they can't get into any repeater. And so a couple suggestions on that. First of all, if you do use your handy-talkie in the vehicle, we suggest you use it on battery power. If you use a power cord and plug into a cigarette lighter or into another 12-volt power source, you may be picking up some noise that's generated internally from the vehicle operation, vehicle wiring, vehicle computers, and retransmit that back out on the air. Or you may hear that noise in your speaker. So if you're going to use your handy-talkie inside your car, use it on the battery that came with the handy-talkie. You may need a second battery if you're going to use it all day, but that's still a better way to do it. If you are listening here a little further down in the program tonight, we'll talk about mobile radios. And when you install a mobile radio, you always run the power to the battery, always. And so if you're using a handy-talkie in your vehicle as your main radio, you might want to consider that. Go ahead and run a power lead to the battery and use your handy-talkie plugged into that, and that will eliminate any noise, either that you're receiving or the other people are hearing on your signal. The other thing is, if you're going to use your handy-talkie in the vehicle, consider an outside antenna, i.e. a mag mount antenna, is what most people buy. Put it in the center of your vehicle, run it through the weather stripping on your back window, and bring it up to where your handy-talkie is, and you'll be amazed at the difference in both reception and transmit quality. You'll be able to get into repeaters that you never even knew existed. So keep that in mind if you're using your handy-talkie in your vehicle. Use an outside antenna, or better yet, put a permanent outside antenna on your car and get ready for the next item that Dan's going to talk about, which is the next step in the whole process: mobile radios.
Absolutely. Yeah, great comments, Paul. And I absolutely wholeheartedly agree on one of the first steps is, if you're going to operate your HT mobile, get that mag mount antenna on the outside. The mag mount antennas, you can, just like HTs, you can spend a little money, you can spend a lot of money. I'm kind of a guy who believes that validity is somewhere in the middle. But as Paul had mentioned, the placement of that mag mount on the outside of the vehicle is critical. One of the nice parts about using it on top of your vehicle, usually the center point on the roof, it provides a very, very nice ground plane. And what that does is that ensures that you are getting the maximum efficiency out of that antenna as possible. You're using your car's roof as that ground plane to make sure of that. So keep that in mind. Now you could say, hey, wait a minute, I have a convertible, or I have something else, I don't have that option. That's okay. You can use a trunk lid. I did that for a number of years. And some people have even used the front of their vehicle, corner of the hood, out of view, of course, of your windshield and your view of traffic, that, absolutely do not obstruct your view of traffic for any of this. So either have it on top of the vehicle, or maybe on the trunk lid on the back. So once you've gotten your feet wet in utilizing an HT while you're mobile, probably the next step, and a lot of the next step of purchases that people will do, is for a mobile radio. Now, a mobile radio, when I got my first mobile radio, I actually used it as a dual purpose. So not only did I use it in the vehicle, because I shared a vehicle with my father, and he would say, get your stuff out of my car. So it was important for me to make sure I was, obeying his commands. But I also used that same radio in my shack. So once I was done using it in the car, I had a slide mount that I simply pulled it out, brought it up to the shack, and I bought a second slide mount, slid it in, and away I went as far as operating. But again, getting back to all of this, as far as a mobile radio is concerned, think about this. Now you're going from a 5-watt HT, and most mobile radios for VHF and UHF are probably putting out about 50 watts. That's a lot of power to be putting out. And as Paul had mentioned, you want to make sure that you're connecting and hooking up your mobile radio directly to the battery. That's very important. If you start using the cigarette lighters, or maybe you're tapping into leads of maybe, throughout the 12-volt system, you can introduce a lot of interference back into your signal. That could be alternator wind, that could be as Paul had mentioned, the general electronics of the system coming back out through your signal. We really recommend that you hook up your mobile radio directly to the battery. Now, again, the same premise falls into line as we had mentioned on HTs. A lot of this depends, and the selection of a mobile radio depends on maybe what got you into ham radio. And if you're into off-roading, or in particular, you may want to consider a radio that has GPS capabilities or that has the ability to send out an APRS beacon. Now, if some of that sounds foreign to you, that is absolutely okay. We'll probably have another presentation lined up in coming weeks on APRS and beaconing and things like that. But I think the important part to realize is that in selecting a mobile radio, like Nicholas, Paul had mentioned, got a excellent radio, an FTM 400. I think you had mentioned, Paul. FTM 400 is, I have an FTM 400 here in my shack. It will likely be a radio that I put in when I have my off-roading vehicle. That will, because I want to be able to have dual band VHF and UHF, but also the capability of doing APRS. And so again, you may want to consider the factors of what am I going to be using it for. And if you're using it for general communication, I want to listen in or I want to be part of a conversation on a repeater, keep that in mind. You may not need a radio that has APRS or GPS capabilities. And that obviously the less capabilities and the less features that a radio has, typically the price point comes down as well. And again, having a permanently mounted radio in the car gives you, one of the benefits of having it is that you always have communication there in your vehicle, which is really important considering how wild the weather here is in Colorado, whether it be snowstorms, whether it be hail or tornadoes, heck, even the fires that have crept up here over the last few weeks. You have a mode of communication that is readily available to you. One of the side effects is that you lose portability. If you have a mobile radio that is permanently installed in your vehicle, it takes a bit of effort to get that thing out of the vehicle. So if you're going to buy a mobile radio and say, I want to have a mobile radio, and you hook it up in the car, keep in mind is that you're probably going to have it in there for a long period of time. And that's okay. But consider that as a factor because it's going to be in there. It's going to be permanently mounted. I should say semi-permanent because not everything's permanently. You can always take it out at some point. But again, you lose some levels of flexibility to say, well, I want to use it in my son's car. I want to use it in my aunt's car. I want to use it in my uncle's car. That becomes a pretty big task in and of itself. But at the same time, too, also consider that you have a new piece of electronic that's in the vehicle. I'm a big advocate on ensuring that you eliminate distractions when you're driving. That becomes a distraction. It can become a distraction. And as a new ham, you have to be very mindful of it. If you're trying to change frequencies or change a memory bank while you're driving, don't do it. Make just like the telephone. Try to do it as hands-free as possible. Get to understand what the buttons on your speaker mic, or excuse me, on your handheld mic do. So I know on my radio in the vehicle, just like this one, in order to change memories up and down is just a couple buttons right on the top. That's all I'm hitting. So get to know your radio. That is also very, very important as well. Some mobile radios come with mounting options. Those mounting options could be a bracket. Some of those are magnetic pieces that permanently fix to a dashboard or under your console, and the radio sticks to it. Or some radios have they actually have a remote head where the base of the radio is somewhere else in the vehicle, preferably close to a power supply or your power source, and easy access to the antenna. And the nice part about having a remote head radio is that it really opens up the different options on placement of where you can put that in your vehicle. And at the same time, too, you're out in public parking spaces. It's really easy to disconnect that remote head and put it in the glove box. Out of sight, out of mind. It keeps the looky-loos. It keeps the those that are interested in what do you have in your vehicle there. I see the antenna. What do you got floating around in there? The nice part is that even with the remote head radios that I have, it's been very nice to unhook it, especially with the holidays coming up. Some shopping that's going to be going on. It's great to disconnect that remote head and put it in a glove box. It becomes out of sight, out of mind. At the same time, too, you may say, well, what do I want to use this for? Am I going to use it just for analog operation? Am I going to use it on multiple bands? Keep that in mind. You know, those are all things to consider. Like I said before, the less features that a radio has, typically the lower the price point. Once you say, hey, I want a dual band radio over a single band radio, the price is going to go up a little bit. I'd like a analog dual band and digital radio that does D-Star or maybe DMR or C4FM. That price point becomes a little bit higher. I'd like to have GPS capabilities. That goes a little bit higher. So a lot of it also comes into play as to what you want to use it for. And again, the biggest thing that I can recommend in any of this, whether it's the HT or the mobile radio installation, ask a lot of questions. Everyone who is part of the PRA, if you're a new member, has been a new member of the PRA. Every single one of us have been the new person walking into the room. Every single one of us has had the opportunity to buy their first radio, to buy their first HT, their first mobile radio. Ask a lot of questions. That becomes so vitally important, and it helps in the learning curve as well. One of the things that we really pride ourselves on is that we really want to shorten that learning curve within amateur radio. We think that's really important because by shortening the learning curve, it becomes more enjoyable. It doesn't become frustrating. And I can tell you from personal experience, I've allowed myself to get frustrated in certain things. I got frustrated with D-Star on the first D-Star radio that I bought. My first D-Star HT, I became very frustrated because I allowed myself not to ask the basic questions to people who I knew had the answer. And once I started asking those questions, well, D-Star became like the coolest thing in the world. So don't be afraid to ask questions throughout any of this. Paul, anything you'd like to add when it comes to mobile radio?
Well, yeah, a couple things, Dan. Amateur radio has led the way in the entire communications industry with miniaturizing the heads of radios, the displays on radios, and providing unlimited mounting options. And once amateurs figured all this out, then you started seeing people like Motorola and other people copying that. But the point is that regardless of the type of vehicle you have, you can get a radio that will fit in that vehicle and can be stealth if you like it, can be more noticeable if you like it. And we can help you with that. If you're working on a radio installation and you need some help, again, please don't hesitate to ask. So that's number one. Just the innovation over the last 10 years with radios is phenomenal. I will make a couple suggestions. One, with the low cost of dual band mobile radios today, I don't think there's a lot of difference between a really good quality single band radio and a dual band radio. So we're talking about the difference between a VHF only radio or a UHF only radio and a radio that does both VHF and UHF. So I would strongly recommend, as you're looking for that mobile radio, that you look for a dual band radio, because you're going to find that there's going to be a lot of Parker Radio Association activity on the W0 CFI repeater, which is UHF. But then the PRA throws in a VHF repeater, right? Or there's the CRA repeater, 145, 145. What a hoot to listen to sometimes. And, so having the dual band capability is fantastic. And not to mention the fact that a lot of your simplex operation is done on VHF. And we have a VHF net the fourth Thursday of every month on 146.55. So even if you don't have a base station radio that operates on VHF, you can go jump in your mobile and get on our simplex net. So I think the next logical step, like Dan mentioned, is to go to a mobile radio. And some people have a mobile radio in every vehicle they own, and it's just a fixture. With the cost of radios coming down a lot, certainly for the entry level dual band radios, I think that's even feasible. Now, the higher end dual band radios, the FTM 400s and the ICOM 5100, hopefully someday to be 5200, you have to pay a little more for those radios. But then they do things that are very beneficial, like what's called cross band repeat. And we won't go into that tonight in any great detail, but imagine your mobile radio being a repeater, essentially. And you're out hunting with your handheld and you're talking back to your mobile radio, which repeats that signal to a local repeater. Wow. So as you start paying more for the radios, the more full-featured radios have things like crossband repeat, and as Dan mentioned, GPS is built in, and APRS and things like that. So don't count those radios out if you have to save a few more months before you have enough moolah to pick up one of those, and sometimes that is that's good. And one other thing I mentioned, and we're not going to go into a lot of detail tonight on it, but we talked about radios that cover VHF and UHF as dual band radios. But did you know that there are radios out there that do VHF, UHF, and they cover HF, which typically is used by people that have their general and their extra license. All the lower frequencies become available to you. So you can buy one radio that covers all the HF bands, VHF and UHF, and usually those are all mode radios.
Mm-hmm.
So you can operate sideband on HF, but you can operate sideband on VHF as well, which is pretty cool because there's a lot of VHF sideband activity in Colorado. Now, here's a suggestion. During the peak of the sunspot cycle, I always run an HF radio in my vehicle. And as we start coming to the bottom of the cycle, I usually take it out. But when we start reaching the peak of the cycle, you will be able to work stations all over the world from your vehicle. And a friend of mine, as a matter of fact, had a 20-minute drive from his work QTH to his home QTH. And he went home for lunch every single day, WD5 HYY. And in less than 6 months, working HF mobile from his work to his home, and then the next morning from his home to his work, he got DXCC 100 countries. just he didn't have a base station radio at his house. He had a mobile HF radio only. Now, there's a little more to mobile HF. It's not as easy as some people make it sound, and we'll talk about that more in detail. As a matter of fact, we have the topic of HF mobile on our schedule for the first part of 2021 as an Elmery night. So you'll definitely want to jump in and see that presentation as well. Now, Dan, I mentioned something that I'm going to ask you to elaborate on a little bit. We talked about HTs, and you go out usually and buy an HT when you're newly licensed.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about the next step almost always is we go out and buy a mobile radio
Mm-hmm.
and put it in our vehicle. But then what happens next? The bug just keeps working at you, and you have to keep pulling your card out of your wallet, and you have to keep stopping by the toy store. But the next logical step is you really probably want a radio at your home QTH or your home shack as a base station radio. Now, the cool thing about it is that almost everybody here tonight that's been a ham for any length of time has some type of base station radio, but they usually use a mobile radio for that, don't they? So you have two options with your home shack. If you want to put in a VHF, UHF radio, you can either put in a mobile radio or you can put in a dedicated base station radio. And Dan's going to touch base on both of those.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I want to mention too is that remember back your first purchase, which may have been a handheld radio. And if it was a handheld radio, One of the things that I did when I was first licensed, and again, I was in my early teens, so full-time employment was not an option. I was more worried about school, baseball, and finding the next party, but that's a whole other story. But at the same time, too, I said, well, again, I have this handheld radio. I don't have the funds, or, I'm making the decision I don't want to buy a mobile radio in the house. What do I do? One of the things that I did have enough money for was to go out and buy a dual band base station antenna. Now, that dual band base station antenna, I mounted on the roof of mom and dad's house. And once I did that, all I had to do was hook up my HT, just like I was doing in the car, hooking it up to the roof of the mag mount of the car, use the HT to the roof mounted dual band antenna. And voila, now I had a multi-purpose radio. Not only could I use it portable, but I could also use it at my base as well. That antenna sat on the top of the roof line. It was probably a good 30, 40 feet up at the peak of my parents' house. And that was a inexpensive way for me to utilize a radio that I already had, plus a power supply at the house, and use the HT to be able to communicate. Now, where I lived in southern New Jersey, I could communicate on 5 watts as far north as Trenton, New Jersey, which was a good 40, 45 miles to the north. And there were, on a really, really good, good propagation, I could actually work some repeaters in Maryland. Working repeaters in Delaware was easy. Working repeaters throughout Philadelphia and outside the Philadelphia area was very easy. So don't be discouraged. Just if you can only do an HT, and you can also do an external antenna for your vehicle and your house, this is a great way to go. You'll be surprised at what you can do with 5 watts at the house on an external antenna. Don't be ashamed of that. I did that for a number of years, and quite frankly, I did it all the way to college. I actually brought that same setup, took the antenna down from mom and dad's house, because I knew there was I knew there was a vent pipe outside of my dormitory room that I could hook the outside antenna up. Brought the HT with me. I had communication through it when I was at college, and I thought that was really cool. Now, again, 5 watts. Paul had mentioned going to the possibility or the option of adding a mobile radio in the shack. Now, some of the benefits behind that primarily are you're getting more power out. So again, 5 watts on the HT versus 50 watts on a mobile radio that you have set up in the shack, you're simply going to have more power. There's going to be more opportunity for you to reach those distant repeaters, which is, could be an option. Again, a lot of it depends on what do I want to use it for. The mobile radio that I have in my shack, I know I use it just for local communication. On the local repeaters, I use it for a hookup with a hotspot that I have here at the house, which is a different topic for another time. But it gives me everything that I need. And again, you may also have that argument. Do I want dual band or do I want single band? Paul had made an excellent point earlier when he said the pricing point between single band radios, mobile radios, and dual band aren't that far off from one another. Again, they can be very far off from one another depending upon the feature sets, but that's one thing that you may want to keep in mind as well. Now, when it comes to that, an outside antenna, on either the HT setup in the shack or the mobile radio setup in the shack, I would consider that almost a must that you need to do. And if you can get your outside antenna or get a external antenna outside mounted as high as possible, if you can't get it on the roof, try to do the attic. That would be your second best option as well. That's something that I absolutely have to get done in my shack, and I've been talking about that, what now, Paul, 6 years? That I have to, 5 years, 6, 7 years. I mean, it's eerily weird that I'm coming up on that anniversary date as well. But not to digress, having a dual band antenna set up within the attic is probably your second best option that you can possibly do. Again, the theory of antennas, particularly with VHF and UHF communication, the higher you have it, the better. The same holds true with HF. The higher the antenna you have, the better that you're going to end up being. So again, one of the things you have to also consider from a budgetary standpoint, if you add a mobile radio, well, what do I hook it up to? You're going to have to consider for the budget, you're going to have a power supply. And power supplies range in price ranges from $50, $60, $70 all the way up, into the, 150s, $200 very, very easily. And we can have a whole other presentation on power supplies at another time. The power supplies a power supply is going to be one key feature that you're going to need if you decide to set up a mobile radio inside your house. May not necessarily need it with an HT. However, some HTs, if you talk a lot like I do, you may want to consider a power supply for your HT. But keep in mind, the longer that you talk, particularly on an HT with a power supply, this little puppy dog's going to get warm. Keep that in mind as well. Some new hams, they dive in head first. Do you need a tower? Do you need a 45, 50-foot tower to do it? As great as that would be, you may not be necessarily. Use an existing vent pipe to put a dual band antenna on. Use attic space to put that dual band antenna in. Although towers are great, you'll be able to get the same level of communication with a $100 VHF UHF antenna that's roof mounted than what you would on a tower at 45 feet. And again, I think the big thing that we always have to remember throughout all of this is the quality of things that you put in. So we talked about power supplies, we talked about mobile radios. Make sure, particularly not only mobile, but also in your home shack, get good quality coax. Good quality coax can be the difference between your signal getting out and you hearing things and not getting your signal out and hearing nothing. Get good quality coax. Don't cheap out on coax. If you're buying yourself a $200 radio, don't be fearful of spending money on good quality coax. That is absolutely very, very important. Anything I missed, Paul, as far as a home setup with a mobile or an HT?
Dan, I think you covered it. The only thing I would say is that there are dedicated base station radios. If you don't want to use a mobile and you want to jump in head first, you can buy radios that are designed to be base station radios. And they're typically larger, they have bigger displays, and they're in some cases very, very pricey, like the ICOM 9700, right? But there's a lot of advantages too. Sometimes your dedicated base station radios for VHF and UHF also do sideband. So if you're interested in VHF sideband, that might be the way to go. Or if you have an ICOM 7300 and you just want a matching VHF UHF radio, then by all means look at that 9700 or something similar from a Kenwood standpoint. But I think the bottom line here, Dan, is that we've talked everybody into buying a handy talkie, at least one. We've talked everybody into buying a mobile radio and putting that in their vehicle.
At least one.
At least one. And we've talked everybody into putting some type of radio in their shack, which probably will be the first of many, because I think I'm looking through the list of people that have checked in tonight, and I can tell you that there are a lot of people on the Elmer night tonight that have way more than 3, 4, and 5 radios in their shack. So that's kind of where it all ends up. Well, so you've got all these radios and you're able to communicate. So what do you do with that? I mean, it's one thing to chat with people on the repeater, but maybe there's some other things people would like to do as a licensed ham. And I can think of several things right off. I'll just throw one out, and then maybe you can throw one out. We all just talk about the regular rag chew, where we're getting on the air talking about the weather, talking about lunch, talking about that packet signal that was on the repeater today. Whatever the case is, what else can you do once you get on the air, Dan?
Well, that's a great point, Paul. So, I mean, the standard rag chew, boy, that is for me is one of the more enjoyable moments of my day. Going into work and coming home is to be able to have that rag chew on the way home. But one of the other things too, again, amateur radio is a service, and as much as it's a hobby, it's also a service as well. Typically, we are a backup means of communication for a lot of emergency services, whether it's the sheriff's department, local police, municipalities. Getting involved in emergency communications, the Amateur Radio Emergency Services, or ARES. It's a great way to not only give back to the community, but you really get plugged in at those local levels with some of the local governments. And it's also a great way to not only prepare, but there's a tremendous amount of training that goes into ARES as well. And I think in some future meetings, we'll be able to have a full-blown ARES presentation, probably going into 2021. But that is another way that you can get involved and get on the air and get more training is through the Amateur Radio Emergency Services, or ARES. Maybe you live in Douglas County. There's the Douglas and Elbert's ARES DEC group, so ARES of Douglas and Elbert County. There's Arapahoe. Arapahoe County has their own ARES group, and typically each ARES group has a served agency, one that they're partnered with, that they support. Again, when all else fails, they come calling to amateur radio operators to be able to help. So public service is a big option within amateur radio. One of the things that we do as the PRA, we participate annually with a local nonprofit group that supports a national program called Pedaling for Parkinson's. They're a nonprofit group that raises money for Parkinson's research nationally. We got plugged in with this group 2 or 3 years ago, and what was amazing is that they were struggling with having effective communication from their start-finish line throughout the course. It covered about 65 miles throughout Arapahoe and Douglas counties. And they were using everything from their trusty cell phone that wasn't working so well. They even tried some business band radios, and we know with business band radios, they're simplex. So it was line of sight communication. That's pretty hard to go from the depths of Centennial all the way down to the depths of the Pinery and back on a simplex frequency. Somebody tipped them off to ham radio operators, and they actually found us and said, "Is this something you can help with?" Absolutely. So we came out, and I think the inaugural meeting that we had with that group, there was probably about 15 or 20 of us that came out. And before the event even started, the program director for Denver came up and said, "I'm so thankful that every one of you are here." And I said, "Well, we haven't done anything." She said, "You have no idea what you've done. We already feel safe. We know the message is going to get through, and we know each and every one of you are going to be able to communicate effectively throughout all the checkpoints." And I said, "Well, how did you know that?" She said, "I just overheard you guys and listened in on your frequencies, and you guys are going to do a fantastic job for us." And at that point, the event hadn't even started yet. Fast forward to this year, I actually got an email back from them. They said, "Tell us what dates in June we can't hold our event, because we know you guys have some big event in June, like Field Day or something." I said, "Yeah, Field Day. We don't want to plan our event near Field Day, so can we do it in early June? Can we plan our event?" Absolutely. So I'm really looking forward to the PRA supporting the Pedaling for Parkinson's in 2021. It's going to be a great event.
Well, there's so much more. There's contest and there's some of the simplex nets and nets.
Don't forget the nets.
Does anybody know that the Parker Radio Association has really 4 nets? We have our Monday night digital net. We have our Tuesday night analog net on the W0CFI repeater. We have our Thursday night Elmer/Tech net on the W0CFI repeater. And then the 4th Thursday of the month, we have a simplex net. And what a blast that is. So now that you have your license, you can certainly jump on and participate on all those nets as well. And as you get really good at operating on the repeaters and operating um, on simplex with other people, then you can also kind of help the whole hobby expand by becoming an Elmer yourself. And we're going to have a presentation on that here in a couple months, how you, if you've never been an Elmer, you've never actually gone out and assisted anybody, we're going to kind of give you a way to get into that easily. So you don't have to know everything there is to know about being an Elmer, but we're going to kind of point you the right direction and let you tag along so you can kind of see what some of us do and how our Elmering committee works, because we'd like to see 10 more people on our Elmering committee. But that's another topic for the future. Well, let's just talk about what's next then, Dan, because you get your license and you get your tech license. I think the next step is you get a general license and then you get an extra license. That's kind of how I see things going with individuals. And the cool thing about that is that we are here to help you with that. Now you can do like Nicholas did. He goes in and got his tech license and his general the same day. And we have other people in the club that got their tech, general, and extra in the same day. But a lot of times people progress a little more slowly. So we're here to help you with that. Yeah, me too. Long time between general and extra. But we're here to help you with that. There's all different types of training tools that you can use to get to that next level. And what does that next level get you? Well, in a lot of cases, it gives you a lot more frequency that you can operate on. And we were on with one of the club members Sunday. He was testing out his 10-meter antenna, and he's a tech. So we were on the 10-meter voice portion of the band on 10 meters on the voice portion. And there were people operating on the general area that were operating, that were calling CQ from Brazil and from Nova Scotia and from Europe. I know he really wanted to get down there and get up there actually and work those stations. And what I found out is that he's studying for his general. He wants to be on those other frequencies. So as you move from tech to general, you pick up frequencies. And then when you move to extra, you get the whole shooting match. Right, Dan?
That's right.
You don't have to worry about what frequency you're on. You just simply have to tune the dial and key up the mic. But there's so much more in the hobby than just VHF, UHF, and HF, because when you break it down, there's a whole lot of other things that you can do. I'm just going to read through the list real quick. And if you want to comment on any of them, Dan, when I get done, go ahead. There is hotspots. Huge area of amateur radio today revolves around hotspots. There is, there are clubs. You can join a club. I know a good one. Field day. You can become a net controller. We need net controllers. You can participate in nets. We've already talked about that. You can get involved in kit building. You can get involved in building antennas. We have some members that have never bought an antenna in their life. They only build antennas. It's a very, very cool part of the hobby. Public service, as Dan mentioned. Portable radio outings. That's something that a lot of us like to do. Again, Elmering. And then the last two things I have on my list here: learn, and teach. So any of those, Dan, anything in that list I just read off that kind of is interesting to you that you maybe have not been involved in, but you'd like to get involved in?
That's a great comment, Paul. So I mean, every one of those just resonates through what the amateur radio service is all about. There's even national programs beyond ARES, like the National Traffic System, NTS. They have daily nets here within Denver, and they pass traffic across the country. When I hung up from our monthly meeting last week, I actually got a telephone call from the National Traffic Systems manager from Colorado gave me a call on a message that came from the Army Mars director in Washington, which I thought was pretty cool. So the National Traffic System is something I haven't been involved with, but boy, getting that message and knowing that something went from it started in Washington, that went through the National Traffic System network from Washington over the air and got passed over to me. And I said, well, when did the message originate? This is what's going to blow everyone away. Typically, when I've gotten an NTS message, it's been a couple weeks from when the message originated to when I received it. That message originated from Washington 30 minutes prior. I thought that was pretty cool.
Well, that must mean you're an important guy.
I don't know about that. I think, every once in a while a blind squirrel gets a nut, and that's ended up what happening with me. And I think the key thing that Paul pointed out was, not only learn, but teach, teach, teach. And I think there's three things when you first get on the air are just basic principles to master. The first is going to be listening, and being a good amateur radio operator starts by listening a lot. That is absolutely imperative to do. And I got a word of caution, and be careful. Not everything that you hear on the bands are going to be good examples. Even some of us old timers, we commit errors. And so again, use your judgment wisely with that. And if you're active on the bands, be a good example on the air. You are an ambassador to the amateur radio service. You'll be amazed. It's not just amateur radio operators that are listening in on our conversations, whether it's the repeater or whether it's on HF. You want to be that good example. You want to be the ambassador. One of the other things too that I think is important is to make sure that you use your call sign correctly. Never start a transmission by just calling somebody and just saying, "Hey, Paul, how's it going?" without having your call sign there. Identify yourself using your complete call sign, not just the suffix. Identify frequently. We know that through the testing and what we've all learned, we have to identify at a minimum of every 10 minutes at the start and at the end of a transmission. And I think what's also important too, within amateur radio and the code of amateur radio is just to be a good person. Stay polite. Don't use foul language. Be courteous and gentle in all circumstances. And I think that's really what encompasses our motto within the Parker Radio Association of play radio, have fun, keep the squelch loose. And to end my commentary tonight, I'd like to quote George Bernard Shaw, who said, "There's no accomplishment so easy to acquire as politeness, and none more profitable."
Oh, very, very good. Very good. Excellent, Dan. Thank you. And I just want to end the meeting tonight with, I'm going to actually throw it back over to Dan, because I want to just make one brief comment about an organization that I really hope everyone listening tonight belongs to. About all the changes that go on in the political world. We're getting ready to see some of those maybe here next week, and other changes that take place in Washington. It's absolutely critical that we continue our ability to lobby for amateur radio, but the ARRL does more than that. They do quite a bit more than that. And I was talking to a gentleman one time who said, I'm not a member. He said, they've never done anything for me, and I said, no, that's where you're wrong. They're always working behind the scenes, doing something that benefits amateur radio operators. Now, you can argue that the politics within the ARRL sometimes are a little difficult to stomach, or other things that they do, you wish that they would focus on one area as opposed to the other area. But the bottom line is, if you take it in its whole, the ARRL is a huge friend to amateur radio operators. And So we're very fortunate that Dan is a member of that organization at a management level, and so oh, and by the way, will I get my ARRL T-shirt for saying this?
Yeah,
By
I think I have it here in my stack of
Oh,
stuff.
thank you. Yeah, he told me if I said some nice things about him, I'd get a T-shirt. But no, we, in all seriousness, we're very fortunate to have Dan in the role that he's in a management role within the ARRL, where his input is important, and so we're going to end tonight by letting Dan give us just a couple comments about the ARRL, and while he's not going to ask you at the end of this meeting tonight, go join the ARRL. Okay, I will do that. If you're not a member of the ARRL, please take some time tonight or tomorrow, and if you say, I'm going to join because AC5S said I should join, okay, that's fine. If you join for any other reason, that's fine too. But if you're not a member, please join. It's very important. So Dan, let me just throw it over to you. You can close the meeting out tonight, but give us just a couple words of wisdom about the ARRL.
So that Paul, thanks for that. So back in I think it was June or July this year, I was appointed as the vice director for the Rocky Mountain Division. So along with Jeff Ryan, who is the director of the Rocky Mountain Division, we represent not only Colorado but also Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico amateur radio operators. We also support the section managers of each of those states as well. And really, the probably the biggest honor that we have is that we get to be the voice of these 4 states back to the ARRL board. We're a part of the ARRL board, so it's a major undertaking, and again, absolutely humbled to be part of that organization. The ARRL is the only and is actually the sole advocate for amateur radio at a national level. And what does that mean? You've probably heard me talk about in several past meetings about protecting our bands, protecting our frequencies. They have some high value, believe it or not. You go back into years where some of these frequencies were just assigned to amateur radio, and it was like, well, here you go, amateur radio, have fun with it. Now those frequencies have some value, and there's some corporations that have some big bucks that want to pay high dollar every year to say, we want to be the primary users of those, and we want to take that back, and we're offering to pay this in order to get a chunk of that band. And that's where the ARRL comes in. So not only is it an organization that has a great monthly publication that comes out called QST Magazine, the ARRL is much more than just a monthly magazine. Joining the league is $50 a year. That's a pretty steep, price point. I'm happy to admit that. But what getting involved and getting more plugged in with the ARRL, like I have over the last couple of years, is that your $50 a year goes well beyond just the publication of QST Magazine or any of the publications. There's a tremendous amount of lobbying effort that needs to take place at Washington, not only for the protection of our bands, but there's also a great deal of lawyer fees that are involved with it. Again, the ARRL is a corporation. There's lawyers that not only are involved in the corporation, but those lawyers also have involvement also through the FCC and through the government. One of the biggest things that's on the table right now is the FCC has proposed a blanket fee, and this is for all services that utilize the FCC. They want to charge a blanket fee, which would impact amateur radio operators as part of this proposal, a $50 fee for license renewals, a $50 fee for taking a technician test, $50 fee for taking a general, $50 fee for taking an extra. So if you sit for all 3 examinations, the FCC is saying, we'd like $150, please. And that's one thing that the ARRL is absolutely fighting against. We feel that because of the service of what amateur radio brings back not only to the community, but we're also a pipeline for future RF engineers. those that are on this call that are in that industry, you know there's a tremendous lack of skilled, qualified RF engineers at the helm. I mean, it is underemployed. Amateur radio provides that pipeline for the future RF engineers to get involved and get plugged in the workplace. We talked about public service. We talked about Aries. We talked about our event with pedaling for Parkinson's. The equipment that we use in those events, they all belong to us. We own the equipment. They're not purchased for us, or organizations don't purchase for us. We're utilizing our own HTs. We're self-serving. And also part of that self-serving falls back into the volunteer examiners. We have a great network of volunteer examiners throughout Colorado. And what's amazing to me is that the VE sessions there's nothing that from an administrative standpoint, other than hitting a button, that the FCC has to do. We administer the test, we grade the test, we file the appropriate paperwork, we submit that back through the VEC, whether it's W5YI, the ARRL, Laurel VEC. There's a couple others that are also out there, but that's all done without any input from the FCC. We're doing all of that collectively. We're handling all the administrative efforts and funneling that pipeline through the VEC back to the FCC. So what we're also, again, that's one of the reasons why we're adamantly against that $50 fee. Will the $50 fee kill amateur radio? The answer is no, it won't kill amateur radio, and here's why. Fees for amateur radio have been in place in the past, so there's a historic precedence that has been there, but to use that as a reason to tell the FCC you can't do this or it's going to kill amateur radio, that's really not the case. But what it does do, and what we have to make sure that we voice very, very clearly, and again, I would encourage you not only to go to the ARRL website tonight to look this up, but also here within the division, if you look up RockyMountainDivision.org, all one word, we have information on there on some key talking points that you want to make as part of your response back to the FCC and becoming part of the Federal Register. Those comments are absolutely taken into consideration, and at the same time too, the ARRL has daily conversations back through the FCC offices. And again, the decision that did this was not the friends from the FCC that the ARRL has worked with. It was a completely different group. So our voice matters in this, and it's going to be vitally important that, and what I'm asking each of you to do, is to submit a response back to the FCC. That filing deadline is coming up. I don't have that right here in front of me. I know it's the beginning to the mid of November, but get on the ARRL website, get on the Rocky Mountain Division website, and make sure you check those out as well. Your responses are going to be critical to make sure that we really drive this home and send a message back to the FCC regarding this. Again, for what amateur radio does, the involvement of what we do in the community, what we're trying to do with youth and building up their skill sets within RF engineering, and at the same time too, the general good and well-being that we have, it becomes vitally important that we're expressing that and demonstrating that as one unified voice back to the FCC opposing this $50 fee. So from a ARRL standpoint, let's get back to a great monthly magazine that comes out, QST. You can get a hard copy, or if you're, as you're a member, you don't want to get the hard copy, you can download it off your iPad or any other mobile device, which is really cool. Now, they also have a series of other publications that come out. Now, again, we're talking about Elmer Night. This is one of the coolest magazines that came out here recently, called On the Air. It's a quarterly magazine that comes out that is really geared towards the new or coming back into the hobby or coming back into the amateur radio service. They have some amazing basic articles. I will admit, QST can become very technical. I'm not going to deny that. On the air is a lot like the conversation we had tonight. It talks about the basics, and they have some great examples in here. I'm just flipping through the one that came out for the months of September and October, and they just have some really cool articles on tropospheric ducting and what that is, what's going on with simulated emergency tests. What are beacons all about? Let's talk about RF connectors. And the articles are very basic, but they're excellent and right to the point. There hasn't been an article that I read in here that I have not walked away and go, you know what? I've actually learned something a little bit new that I didn't know before. So even if you're a 25-year ham and you're a member of the ARRL, guess what? You have access to On the Air magazine and every one of the ARRL publications through the electronic format, which is really cool. So again, from advocacy to education to protecting the amateur radio service, and then also the lobbying efforts that take place in Washington, it takes a tremendous amount of effort to be able to support the 700,000 plus amateur radio operators there are across the U.S.
Well, Dan, thank you for that information, and thanks for co-hosting tonight. And we've had a great evening. So I think now is the time we can open it up to questions, and not necessarily for Dan and I to answer, because we don't have all the answers. Well, we like to think we do, right, Dan? But we don't.
Once in a while.
But we don't. So let's open it up to questions. And if we have questions out there, there are plenty of Elmers on tonight that can help out. And we'll take some questions here for a few minutes. Wayne, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I'm taking a look. I don't see any posted as of yet in the YouTube chat, but I have been trying to keep an eye on that. Doug Harvlin did have a question about if you wanted to talk to people all over Colorado. I know line of sight is limited, but is HF a possibility to talk to people, say in Leadville? And I had mentioned NVIS. Anybody want to comment any more on that?
Well, I think the answer there is yes and no.
Go ahead, Cameron.
Go ahead, Cameron.
So no, I was going to say, Paul, I think he did a thing on NVIS not too very long ago for an Elmer's night. And yeah, but it's got a range of a few hundred miles, give or take, depending on how you have things set up and how the atmosphere is behaving. Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, the possibility is there. Just kind of, the answer is it depends.
All you need is a long wire, an NVIS wire, and a kilowatt. You can talk to everybody in Colorado.
Well, and they're also linked repeaters, like the Colorado Repeater Association links a whole bunch of repeaters together. So you can actually communicate with people throughout the state on VHF and UHF. And then if the conditions are right, you probably can't talk from here to Leadville on a ground wave, but possibly a sky wave on some of the bands, some of the lower frequencies. And then, like Cameron said, absolutely via what's called NVIS. And we'll be happy to give you more information on that. There's a whole presentation on that. And so the best way we can answer your question is yes, and sometimes no.
I still like the kilowatt. But that was the only question that I saw come through. So nothing. Anyone in the actual Google Hangout? Any questions?
Maybe not a question, but kind of just as a kind of reiterate kind of what they said, that teaching is the best way to learn. I was struggling to figure out how to pass my general test. I was just having a hard time with the questions for some reason. And then my church, I helped another guy teach a technician's class and was ready to go take my general test in like 2 weeks. just because I had to learn the information to a level that I could explain it to people. And lo and behold, all of a sudden I can go out and pass the general test without a whole lot of effort.
Great story. Thank you. Very good story.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Cameron. You're absolutely right. It's amazing how you can spend time with a study guide and just have your nose deep into it, and boy, what does this mean? What's going on here? But then when you take that step back and you have to explain what you've already known and passed to somebody else, kind of resets everything all over again. So yeah, that's a great story. Thanks for sharing that.
I'll share a brief story with everyone. Last year before field day, one of our new members basically asked me, what's this field day thing all about? And I told him, and he goes, well, that just doesn't interest me. I just want to do short range communications, repeaters, stuff like that. And I said, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. There's people that have been amateurs for 40 years and they've never picked up an HF radio, never talked on one. I said, but come to field day. Just come to field day and see what it's all about. Well, by Saturday afternoon, he was sitting in there on the HF rig and we couldn't get him off of it. And the next thing you knew, he passed his general test. So, yeah, there's a lot of things in amateur radio. You may think that you joined for one reason. I did. And then down the road, somebody shows you their moon bounce setup, and you're like, I'm going to do moon bounce, So, yeah, and that's another good reason to upgrade. You get more experience with other parts of the hobby that maybe you weren't as familiar with. So just a quick throw out there. Anything else, Wayne?
Nothing as of yet, but as you were talking about that, I would say another thing, just I've been a ham for 3 years, and just my knowledge of, solar weather. I've learned a bunch about that and how it affects HF and, for the good and also for the bad. And and if you haven't looked, the solar flux is really high. We got the sun is coming alive. So some good propagation coming. So, but it's definitely a lot of fun.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the Google Meets and YouTube Live tonight. We do a live meeting twice a month. We do our face-to-face business meeting followed by a presentation, which is always fantastic, I might add. Wayne and John are coordinating that this year, and they've done a great job. Then we have this meeting live, usually the week after our face-to-face meeting. And then between all that, we have our nets. So we're glad you're here tonight. We're glad you're participating. We'll go ahead and shut it down here just a couple minutes early. I think we were planning to shut it down at 8 o'clock. So we're a couple minutes early. Dan, any last thoughts before we pull the plug?
Yeah, I think the last thing that I really want to add is number one is just to say thank you for joining us tonight. I think that having you here is just so important to us. We're glad that you're here. Don't be afraid to reach out to us. We have a great website. Our website committee has just done a fantastic job with our website. So get yourself over to www.parkerradio, all one word, .org. You're going to find a mess of information on there from our events, our calendar, our net information, our repeater information. We actually have a forums page as well. So maybe you have a general question about, hey, what brand or what antenna should I buy for a mag mount? The forums is a great place to place that question and then get some interactive feedback as well. So great stuff there. Also in the forums, you may find hey, you know what? Somebody didn't like the HT that they just bought, and you might be able to score an HT for pennies on the dollar. So make sure you check out what's for sale. $40? Is that what you said, Paul? You're on mute. I'm trying to read.
There's a dual band VHF, UHF, analog, and digital radio on there for $40.
That's a lie.
I'm serious. So
What
yeah,
kind of digital?
definitely check out our for sale section. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, Dan, but I just had to throw that in there. It's been up there for several days. I'm surprised nobody's picked it up.
So again, I want to say, number one, check out the website. There's just a mess of information that's there. And if you have additional questions, don't be afraid to use the Contact Us tab. It goes out to a plethora of the members that we want to be able to answer your questions. If you're a Facebook user, jump on to Facebook. Make sure you like our page so you can stay updated there as well. And then obviously we're piping this meeting via YouTube. So like the Parker Radio Association YouTube channel, like the videos, subscribe to the channel. That way you're updated on all our future events that we're doing in a virtual setting. So Paul, I want to thank you, number one, for pulling this all together. Boy, just a great presentation. Thank you for including me as a part of it. And boy, I really like the interaction that took place tonight. So again, I want to say thank you to those that joined us. I think at the peak we had about 30 or 35 people here. So again, thank you so much for being part of the Parker Radio Association. We're glad you're here. And as Paul had mentioned, make sure you check out the offering through the American Radio Relay League, or the ARRL. Love to have you as a member there as well. So on behalf of Paul and the rest of the leadership team within the Parker Radio Association, I'm Dan, N2SRK, saying 7-3. Have a great night. We'll see you next time.
7-3, everybody.
7-4.
And we're off.